third graders, we are still reading The World According to Humphrey, and this is a story that's told in the eyes of the hamster and what he sees going on in the classroom and with different kids and teachers. So Mrs. Brisbane was already in room 26 when we arrived. She smiled at Miss Mack and shook her head. Then she frowned at me and she said, "Is that some kind of rodent?" Miss Mack gave her the speech about how much kids learn from taking care of other species. Mrs. Brisbane looked horrified and said, "I can't stand rodents. Take it back." Um, the it, she said, which that she was talking about, was me. Miss Mack didn't bat an eyelash. She put my cage in its usual place by the window and said to the kids when the kids were already attached to me. She attached Dr. Harvey H. Hammer's guide to care and feeding of hamsters to the cage, along with a chart to make sure I was fed and my cage was cleaned on time. "The children know what to do, and you won't have to do a thing," Miss Mack said to Miss Brisbane as she glared at me. Just then, my fellow students came streaming into the room, and within half an hour, Miss Mack had said goodbye to everyone, including me. "I'll never forget you, Humphrey," she whispered. "Don't you forget me either." "Not likely, but I don't know if I could ever forgive you," I squeaked. And then she was gone, without me. Mrs. Brisbane didn't even come close to my cage until recess. Then she walked over and said, "Mister, you've got to go." But she doesn't know my secret. The latch on my cage door doesn't work. It never has. It's the lock that doesn't lock. So I've got news for Miss Brisbane. If I've got to go, it will be when and where I decide to go, not her. Meanwhile, I'm not turning my back on this woman, not for 1 second. If I ever disappear and someone finds this notebook, just look at Mrs. Brisbane, please. Tip 1. Okay, so remember, this was the Miss Mack was the substitute teacher, and she was the one who got the rodent. That got the hamster for the classroom, and then now Miss Brisbane is taking over back her class. And she doesn't like hamsters, so that's what's going on. So tip 1, choose your new hamster's home very carefully and make sure it's secure. Hamsters are skillful escape artists, and once out of their cage, they are very difficult to find. So that is tip number 1. For the next day, I felt very sad. "You look sad, Humphrey," Golden Miranda said when she was cleaning my cage right before lunch. According to the chart Miss Mack had left, it was her turn to take care of me. Thank goodness. Miranda was the best cage cleaner and never said yuck. She put on throwaway gloves, then cleaned my potty corner, changed my bedding, gave me fresh water, and finally, oh joy, gave me fresh grain and some lettuce and mealworms. Ew, I don't like mealworms. "This will make you so happy," she said as she slipped me the special treat that she had brought from her home, cauliflower. Naturally, Miranda had good taste. I promptly saved it in my cheek pouch until I could store it in my sleeping house. Hamsters like to stash their food for the future. After my cage was taken care of, I felt well enough to observe Mrs. Brisbane more carefully. Now Miss Mack was tall, wore bright colors, short skirts, and high shoes. She wore bracelets that jingled, and she spoke in a loud voice and waved her arms and walked all around the room when she taught. Mrs. Brisbane, on the other hand, was short, with gray hair. She wore dark clothes and flat shoes, and she didn't jingle at all. She spoke in a voice just loud enough to hear and sat at her desk or stood at the chalkboard when she taught. No wonder I was feeling so drowsy after lunch, all that nice food and all that soft talking. "Is that all this hamster does? Sleep?" she asked at one point as she glanced over at my cage. "Well, he's ternal," replied Raise Your Hand Heidi Hopper. "Raise Your Hand Heidi," said Mrs. Brisbane. "What's ternal?" "You know, ternal. He sleeps all day." I was wide awake now. "Nocturnal," I squeaked. "Hamsters are nocturnal." "Oh, you mean nocturnal," said Miss Brisbane, almost as if she had understood me. She turned and wrote the word on the board. "Can anyone else name an animal that's nocturnal?" "An owl," said Heidi. "Raise your hand, Heidi," said Miss Brisbane, "but that is correct. An owl is nocturnal." "Anyone else?" a voice shouted. My dad! Miss Brisbane looked around. Who said that? He did. AJ. Garth Tugwell pointed at AJ. Both boys sat at a table nearest to my cage. What about your dad? Said Mrs. Brisbane. AJ squirmed in his seat. Well, my mom always says my dad is nocturnal because he stays up so late watching TV. Stop giggling, Gail, and a few other students snickered. Mrs. Brisbane didn't crack a smile. So just so you guys know, so like all these little things before somebody's name, like the stop giggling, Gail, is names the hamster is remembering that the teacher said about these kids. Her use of the word is correct, she said, though technically humans are not nocturnal. Anything else? Eventually, the class came up with more names of nocturnal animals like bats and coyotes and possums. And Mrs. Brisbane said that the class would be learning more about animal habitats this year. If she'd just look at me, she could learn a lot. But I noticed the rest of the day that Mrs. Brisbane stayed far away from my cage, as if I had a disease or something. She read a mighty fine story to us in the afternoon, though. In fact, I couldn't get back to my nap afterward. It was about a scary house and those scratching noises and a ghost. Thump, 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 the ghost came down the hall. Oh, I just had the shivers and the quivers. I have to say, Mrs. Brisbane knows how to read a story. Her voice changes and her eyes go wide, and I forgot about her gray hair and her dark suit. To squeak the truth, my fur was on end. The story had a funny ending because it turned out the ghost wasn't a ghost at all, it was just an owl. At the end of the story, everybody laughed, even Mrs. Brisbane. I was beginning to think that life with this new teacher wouldn't be so bad, but I changed my mind when the bell rang at the end of the day and all my classmates raced out the room, leaving me alone with her. She erased the chalkboard and gathered up her papers. I could tell that we'd be going home soon. Suddenly, I began to worry. What if Miss Brisbane lived in a scary house with spooky noises and thumping ghost? Or even worse, what if Mrs. Brisbane had a scary pet like a dog? My mind was racing as fast as I was spinning my wheel when she finally approached and looked down at me, frowning. Well, you're on your own now, she said. With that, she closed the blinds and walked away. But I heard her mutter, rodent, under her breath. She left the classroom and closed the door. She left me alone, all alone in room 26. I had never been alone before. And that's the end of that chapter. So we will find out what happens to Humphrey all alone in the classroom. Okay, if you guys would like to check out books, I hope I can see most of you this week. You guys will be returning to school. That would be super fun. I can't wait to see you all. We will be doing a rolling library probably to the classrooms, but that won't start for another couple of weeks till everybody's at school. So in the meantime, if you would like books, please come to the library. I'm there every day from 8 until 3:30, and I would love to help you get a book. Okay, have a great week. Bye.